intermediate learners, I'm speaking very generally, they broadcast the mistakes on their face, right? They make a mistake and they scrunch up, and it's almost like, I made a mistake. Hey everybody, happy Friday. Oh my God, I'm so excited that the weekend is almost here. I have a bunch of really exciting language learning planned for the weekend involving podcast study in both Spanish and German. That's going to involve all kinds of my methods that I've talked about recently, such as transcription, podcast interview method, more sort of extensive listening, lots of stuff. I would love to know in the comments how your languages are going and what you've got planned for this weekend with your languages. Two really quick things before we jump into today's topic. First of all, I just want to say that I know I've been struggling these last few months to get back to a lot of comments. I just want you to know that I really do read every single comment. I'm struggling a little bit with just the overall workload right now, but please know I read all of them and I absolutely love it. So please keep those coming. And second of all, next week's video schedule is a bit different because I'm going to do a video this Sunday instead of on Monday, which will be the Q&A sort of Patreon special for the month of November. So just so you all know, everyone's invited, anybody can join, and I do try to answer questions in the live chat, but if you want to specifically ask a question in my prioritized list, then that's one of the value things I give to my Patreon supporters, link down below. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about this really interesting problem that I have observed over the last 10 years or longer than that actually, going through lots and lots of language courses and apps and online platforms. And let's be honest, that's how lots of people are learning languages these days. It's with apps and platforms because especially during times like 2020, that is one of the most affordable and accessible ways that people all over the world can learn languages. But every time I get to the advanced level, or maybe they call it something different, like independent or whatever it might be. But there's this almost universal problem, and I want to talk about that today and use that to also discuss a little bit about what it means to be an advanced learner. That's all coming up. Without further ado, let's jump in. Hang on. No. You thought I was going to forget. Absolutely not. It's Friday. Whale Blue Mug. Cheers. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the problem that I have observed with advanced courses. And it can sometimes be genuinely infuriating. And I very rarely get upset or angry. It's not one of the things I'm good at. But this really gets me going. And that is that, a lot of these apps and online platforms and in-person courses, they do a really good job of dealing with the beginner and even the intermediate sort of portion of your journey, and they really do help you through. I certainly have some qualms, which is why does almost every single app and textbook and whatever, why do they want to teach you every single fruit and every single animal and every single kitchen appliance in the beginner section of the course? It just drives me nuts. I don't know why they do it. I don't want to learn aubergine or eggplant, if you're American, when I'm a beginner in French. I just don't want to do it. I don't care how to say blender. I don't care how to say, some kind of specific dish in that language that I'm learning. I'm a beginner. Please teach me useful things. But other than that, a lot of them do a good job. But then the moment you get to the advanced course, right? And I'm all excited to see how this particular institution or platform or app, how are they going to handle the advanced stuff? All they do is they just introduce a ton of very random, specific, specialized vocabulary. And not even across the board, it's just a bunch of nouns, right? And I'll come back to why that's important. But it's just I was doing Pimsleur. I went through the entire course of Pimsleur for Mandarin Chinese, all 5 levels. I think it's 5 levels. The first few levels were actually really good. I really enjoyed it. I was having a great time in level 1, 2, and I think even level 3. But then it got to level 4 and certainly level 5, and it was absolutely infuriating. I learned things like vestibule. We were still using all the same sentence structures, and frankly, we weren't even refreshing some of the really important connector words or conjunctions or really useful things that we learned earlier on. We were just replacing where's the bank with where's the vestibule. I'll see you in the vestibule. Like, what? Why? Things about plumbing, things like learning all kinds of words that are very specific to very specific places and cities in China that I may never go to. Those things may never be a part of my real life experience. But that's apparently what most apps and courses think it means to teach advanced stuff. It's just, let's introduce lots of random specialized nouns. And this drives me crazy because I see a few problems with this. The first problem is that I can't imagine a worse place to learn words about plumbing than in a completely artificial environment in a classroom or on an app. Like, this just, I can't imagine that more than 2% of people come away from those things having really internalized the word for plunger. And if you're not a native English speaker and you don't know that word, don't bother, not important. I don't need to know how to say carburetor in Japanese, unless I'm a mechanic, or unless I have a problem with my car and I have to go to the mechanic or whatever it might be. Like, it's just, I can't imagine anyone actually learns these things. And the problem with this is that when that's the focus, when the focus is just, cool, now we're gonna do all the same stuff, but about these really random topics, it actually makes everything else harder, right? It makes it so much more difficult to focus on maybe the one or two new grammatical structures that they introduce, because all of the words in the sentences, they're just so random. So that's the first problem. It's that, in my opinion, if you're gonna learn those words, that usually happens once you get really good at a language and you start to have more and more real life experiences that makes those things important to you. Now, you might learn them sooner if you're living in the country, right? Maybe you're studying abroad, maybe you just moved there, and yeah, maybe your car breaks down. And so you're gonna have to go and learn a bunch of words about mechanics and things like that. Maybe you have a plumbing issue at your house, and so yes, you might need to learn those words. But, you know, I had a really good level in French before. I didn't know any plumbing words, not really. And I don't think that made me any less of a advanced speaker in French. Now, I did know some words about design and architecture. Those are specialized, but that's because I had those real life experiences. I went on really cool meetup tours and stuff. Also in Spanish, I used to know some really interesting words about like the features of buildings because I went on this awesome meetup tour called George Orwell's Barcelona when I was living there. And we went through like all the different places that he describes in his books, and we read like excerpts from the books, and while looking at the thing he was describing, very often metaphorically, and it was really interesting. So those are words I learned because I had real life experiences that made them relevant. So that's the first problem. The second problem, and I think this leads to a really interesting conversation, is that, you know, I don't think knowing specialized vocabulary is that important when it comes to just being an advanced speaker at a very broad level, right? So obviously I'm speaking in very broad terms right now: beginner, intermediate, advanced. These are very broad. And I've said this before, but I think that these stages are quite long and they get longer and wider as you go. So to me, the intermediate level is a really wide spectrum, and that is wider than the beginner level. And I also think that the advanced level of learning a language, it's also even more broad and even longer and wider than intermediate, right? So when I say advanced, I'm not necessarily talking about near native. That's way down there. When I think of someone being advanced, right? If I were watching a conversation and I were given the task of like estimating someone's level, do you think they're intermediate or advanced or beginner? I'm not going to be looking for, well, is he going to talk about plumbing? I want to hear him say the name of every single specialized dish in the cuisine of this country. No, that's not what I'm looking for at all. The first thing I'll look for probably is how comfortable are they expressing themselves, right? I think in the intermediate level, that's where you start to become able to express yourself, but it's very clunky. You're going to be pausing constantly, making mistakes. Also, when you make a mistake at the intermediate level, it's very often really obvious, but not because the mistake is so terrible. It's just that intermediate learners, I'm speaking very generally, they broadcast the mistakes on their face, right? They make a mistake and they, they scrunch up, and it's almost like, I made a mistake. I'm not making fun of people. I'm doing it right now in a lot of my languages. I'm just saying that that's a feature of intermediate learners very often, is that they make their mistakes really obvious. Now, I think that as you get into those very first, steps of being an advanced speaker, that's when you start to get really comfortable expressing yourself in a language. And that's something I'm looking for when I'm making that assessment. The next thing I'm looking for is just a general breadth of language. But that doesn't just mean specialized vocab. That means things like, are they able to use a variety of different grammatical structures, and do they use the appropriate ones at the right times, right? Are they comfortable with things like relative clauses and making more complex sentences, right? If someone is making lots of really clean sentences, but they're all really short, right? And therefore they have to say a lot of words to get to the point. There's a man. The man cooked. The man went out, and then the man did something. Versus, there was a man who cooked and then went out, and after that, finally, he did this thing, right? If someone's comfortable using a variety of structures like this, right? If someone has a really good ability to describe things without repeating the same words over and over again, to me, that's a great indicator, right? If someone calls everything good and interesting, and that's all they have, everything's good, everything's interesting, or maybe it's bad or not interesting, that's the spectrum that they have to work with, then that's an indicator that maybe they're not terribly advanced. But if someone knows lots of really nice, rich ways to describe something, that's a really good indicator. So these are like a variety of things, right, that I think help. Also, of course, things like being comfortable listening and understanding things. And again, like maybe level of stress and anxiety, that all goes into being comfortable expressing yourself. So the point here is, these are all things that I think you would be far better off focusing on in a classroom, right? So if I'm doing Pimsleur, right? Pimsleur's all focused on listening to sort of conversations and then learning how to break them down and then learning how to repeat things yourself. And then they ask you like, how do you say this? Or how would you respond if I asked you this? Well, when I get to the advanced level of Pimsleur, I would love it if it was like a really authentic, natural 30 seconds of conversation, right? I would love it if we actually used like all the different structures and all the different like connector words and things from the previous levels, and we just found loads of interesting ways to use like all of them in like a single conversation. That would be great. But when I was in level 5 of Pimsleur, I swear to God, they didn't even bring up half the stuff we had learned previously. So I was like forgetting the really fundamental things because it wasn't coming up again. But I was learning vestibule. Why? You know what word came up like 100 times in the first 3 lessons of the level 5? Mung bean cake. Is it mung bean? I can't even remember in English. There were so many like really key like connector words that you could learn. So many really helpful adjectives or just general words. So much practice that you could do just like getting comfortable with a variety of more complex sentences. And in my opinion, that is done a lot more effectively when you keep the vocabulary simple, right? It's a lot easier to become really comfortable making complex sentences when the words are really easy. It's a lot harder when you don't understand any of the words in the sentence. Anyway, I think that was a bit of a ramble, a bit of a rant, I would say. I don't rant very often on this channel. I hope you liked it. I don't really have road rage, for example, but I find it fun. I find it interesting to watch people that have it. So when I'm driving, sometimes I try to pretend and it doesn't really work. But anyway, this is me ranting. Let me know if you want more of this, but I would also certainly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Maybe I'm crazy. Let me know. And with that, as always, I wish you a fantastic Friday and a great weekend. And remember, I'll see you back here on Sunday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time for our second ever live stream. Can't wait.